You're listening to Feathers, a podcast of stories about God speaking and his people having just enough faith to believe him and obey. I hope these stories inspire you and encourage you to take flight in your own faith. I'm your host, Amy Bennett, and this is Season 2, Episode 5. Well, hey guys, and welcome to Feathers. I'm so excited that you are here today. Today we have Kate Battistelli. Kate's an empty nester who's been married to Mike for 30 years. She's the mother of recording artist Francesca Battistelli and Mimi to Franny's two children, Eli and Audrey Jane. She's a Jersey girl currently living in Atlanta, writing about God, food, family, and hospitality. Kate enjoys creating easy, healthy recipes using whole foods and organic ingredients and loves writing about the goodness of God. She's the author of Growing Great Kids, Partner with God to Cultivate His Purpose in Your Child's Life. So parents, you know when you have kids, you kind of lose your name. So to your kids, you're mommy, and to everyone else, you're so-and-so's mommy. I'm Emma's mom or Lexi's mom to a lot of people, and really it's not my favorite thing ever. But I'm going to do that a little here today, and make sure you caught that Kate is Francesca Battistelli's mom. But I'm telling it that way for a really good reason. So let me tell you a little about Francesca, or Franny, as Kate calls her. She's an award-winning Christian music artist. Some of her songs you might recognize are This Is the Stuff, Free to Be Me, Write Your Story, He Knows My Name, and one of my very favorites of hers she has out right now called Holy Spirit. She's been nominated for several Grammy Awards and about 24 Dove Awards, including this year's, that's just around the corner in October. So she's been Female Vocalist of the Year twice from the Dove Awards, and this year she's actually nominated for Song of the Year, Artist of the Year, and Worship Song of the Year. So Kate, I know if you're listening, you are super proud of that list and your daughter, but I share that because years before her success, God was working in her parents' life and gave them a big no to a desire of their heart. And Kate explains in this interview that she believes that perhaps her success would not be able to happen if she had gotten a yes from God. So with her success in mind and this story in mind, I hope this interview blesses you and encourages you that God really does have a plan and good things in store for you, and that we can just trust him and believe him for what he has. So here's my conversation with Kate Battistelli. Well, Kate, welcome to Feathers today.
Hi, Amy. How are you?
I am doing good. Very excited to talk to you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk to you, too.
Great. Well, why don't you introduce yourself and your family to everybody listening?
All right. My name is Kate Battistelli, and I live in Atlanta, a little bit north of Atlanta, with my husband, Mike. We've just celebrated our 32nd anniversary this summer, so we've proven that you can stay married for a long time, and it's been great. We have one daughter named Francesca, and she has given us two phenomenal grandchildren, aged almost 5 and 3. So I am a happy Mimi and wife and mom, and I do some blogging and writing and lots of cooking because I do love to cook, and my husband loves to eat. So that's a little about me.
Yes, your Instagram feed makes me salivate. So you are, I hear, a wonderful cook. I haven't actually picked up one of the recipes. It's kind of like when you're on Pinterest and you're like, oh, I'm going to make that. Right. Oh, I'm going to make that. And then you never really actually get to it. Yeah, but they look good.
You pin 10,000 things. All those DIY that I've pinned, I don't know that I've ever actually made any of them, though they all look great. But, you know, someday.
Yeah, it's just the dream, the thoughts of being able to do it. Okay, so you celebrated your 32nd anniversary. My husband and I just celebrated 17 yesterday.
Awesome.
Yeah, so congratulations. So I have to ask, what's one piece of advice you would give people to last that long?
Oh, boy. You know, I think it's really just listening to each other, just trying to hear the other person's point of view. I'm very opinionated. I always think I'm right, and maybe most of us do. I don't know, but I just am that way, and I have really had to learn to just realize that I don't know everything. My husband's really smart, and I've learned over the years, often, you know, not always with the most gentle and quiet spirit. That's one thing I still pray for a lot. I'm like, Lord, come on, I really need that after 32 years. But, you know, if I really listen to him and take what he's saying and take his advice, it often is right. So I've learned I'm not the one that's always right. So I think if you can just really learn to listen to each other, not just hear them, but listen to what they're saying, and for a wife to be respectful of your husband, to just respect his opinion, his needs, all those things, that's going to help to keep things a lot more smooth.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me that the book Love and Respect, I don't know if you've read that one, it's kind of a classic, but they talk a lot about that, about husbands loving your wives and wives respecting the husbands.
Right.
And I don't know if you've heard about it. I think they call it like the crazy cycle or the crazy wheel or something like that. But it's kind of that thing where everything just goes downhill, like one's upset and then the other one says something and that makes them upset. And then so you just like continually react to each other in like a bad way. And you just like a downward spiral. And they talk a lot about somebody's got to get off the wheel.
Exactly.
Or out of the cycle. Somebody has to decide, okay, I'm tired of this and I'm going to have to be not the bigger or better person, but I just want off. And so I'm going to have to like put myself aside and,
Exactly.
get us off of this.
It's very humbling to be married. I think you have to learn to humble yourself, to take the lower place, to serve the other person. And that goes against everything that human nature is. So for me, God has grown me a lot in that area. Certainly, I'm certainly not perfect. If you'd ask my husband, he would tell you, but he has grown me a lot. And it's something I continue to have to work on because he continues to give me opportunities to work on it. So we're all works in progress.
Yes, absolutely. So today we're actually going to be talking about some struggles in your marriage that you guys have faced, and that is in infertility and some failed adoptions. And so our family, we just adopted from social services last summer. We just celebrated actually 1 year.
Wonderful.
Last week. So that's part of what I share on the very opening episode of just how God worked through that in our lives. But I thought it would be interesting for listeners to hear kind of how God can work through actually a failed adoption as well.
Absolutely.
So I would love for you to kind of go back and start off where your story started.
Sure. My story begins really with, my husband and I didn't meet the Lord till later in life. We'd been married a year, then we gave our hearts to the Lord, then we had our first child, our daughter Francesca, and that was all wonderful, and everything was great. I was the woman who wanted 5 kids. I don't mind the chaos. I love children. I just figured I'll have a big family. I came from a family of 4 siblings. So I figured, 4 or 5, that'll work well. Well, when I guess when Franny was about 2.5, I got pregnant again, but it ended up being an ectopic or tubal pregnancy that we didn't know that. They told me with the ultrasound, I remember going and they said, "No, you're pregnant. Everything's in the uterus. You're fine." And 3 days later, I was in the hospital nearly dying because of loss of blood. Now, unfortunately, ectopic pregnancies are a leading cause of maternal death because you don't know that you think you're pregnant. You don't know that inside you're bleeding to death. So it was a very frightening time, but thank God I had a great doctor and, I got through it and I was fine. And then, of course, after that, we thought, when you go through that, often you're going to lose that one fallopian tube, which I did. They had to remove that in order to save my life. So we lost that baby, and then we started to try to find out how, can I get pregnant again? What's the deal with all of this? And found a great fertility doctor. At that time, we lived in New Jersey, and he was in Philadelphia. So we would go and do the treatments and try to get all this going. I did surgery again to try to open the remaining fallopian tube and make that work. Well, all that to say, nothing worked. I'll never forget, there was a specific test, and I can't remember what it is, but where they do the final test to see if this surgery has taken, and they shoot dye into you, and if it shoots out the fallopian tubes, then you're good. Well, mine didn't, and I just will never forget the doctor looking at my husband and I, very matter of fact, just, "You'll never have children again." And, that's just devastating because that's been the dream of our hearts. So that alone was really tough to deal with. But then after that, we decided, well, okay, we can't have children on our own. Let's try to adopt. And we tried international adoption. We tried regular adoption, private adoption. We tried 3 times and it had the home study, the whole thing. And every time it just fell through for whatever reason. And we just kept going, okay, God. And in my immature Christianity in those years, I'm just thinking, God, you hate me. The word says you're a good father and you love us and you give us the desires of our heart. Why won't you give me the thing that I want? You're not a very good parent, to do this to me. Of course, I just had it all wrong, but God was just really trying to teach me that He is enough. And it's a very hard lesson to learn, especially that way. But as time went on, it took my husband and I quite a while to kind of get it through our heads that we were going to be the parents of an only child and to accept that and to be okay with that because everything kept falling apart. There's even one incident. We had good friends who also were not able to have any children, so they did adopt. They had a successful adoption in Hungary, and it was great. And I remember them calling us from Hungary saying, we're adopting our daughter, and there's a gal here who's pregnant. She's having a little boy, and it's your baby if you want it. And of course, my mother's heart leapt at the thought of that. But at the same time, we were in a class in our church with another couple that had a daughter, just like we did, but couldn't have any more children. And we knew their struggle and their desire to adopt. And as these friends of ours that are in Hungary are telling us about this baby that's available, immediately I just sensed the Lord saying, that's not your baby, which just about killed me because this was the thing we've wanted for such a long time. And the Lord basically said, that's not your baby. Sometimes, sometimes blessings come to you, but they're not for you. They're for you to pass along. And we knew right then we need to call our friends. We need to let them know about this boy. And they ended up adopting this little boy. And it was the perfect fit for their family. It was absolutely right that they got to adopt him. We didn't, and that was tough. But I mean, if you're going to try to live a life following the Lord and being Spirit-led, which is how we try to live. We try to really hear what's the Lord saying, even when it's difficult. And that's probably the biggest thing we learned is that, God will let you go through tough stuff, but it changes you. It draws you closer to Him if you let it. You can also let it drive you away and make you bitter and miserable, but it really drew us closer to the Lord. And our daughter was getting a little older by then. She was starting to show some of these gifts and talents that, she's gone on to do very well in Christian music. And my husband and I both have a background in the musical theater world, more the theater than pop music, but we understand performance. We understand all of that. So God was really positioning this whole thing, I think, to give us this child with a world-class gift and say, is this enough? Are you going to be okay with this? And it took a while, but we eventually were. And I can look back now with many years. Our daughter just turned 30. So I have 30 years of, looking back and going, okay, I can see God's hand. I can see what He was doing. This all makes sense. But at the time you're going through it, when you first are told you're never going to have children again, it's devastating. It's very hard. And the only thing really that got us through was our relationship with the Lord. And we were pretty new Christians at that point. So it sort of puts you into, deep spiritual pursuit school pretty quickly. So it was tough.
So I want to pull out a couple of things that you talked about, that not everything that the Lord gives us is easy, that it's hard to do. He's asking you to give this, really just to give a dream up, a desire of your heart, because I think we lean on people saying, well, if you want it, God is going to give it to you.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. And there was actually a verse somebody was talking about, God will give you the desires of your heart.
Right.
And I think sometimes we misuse that verse a little bit.
Yes, we do. Because if our desires aren't God's desires, that's the thing that we forget. He'll give us the desires of our heart, but as we draw closer to Him, don't you think that His desires become ours and we want the things He wants? That's how I've seen it work.
Yes, and actually somebody was kind of translating and talking about giving you the desires of our heart. And I think we take that in, whatever desires in my heart.
Right.
he's going to give that to me. Where somebody said, and I hate to not have done the work on my own to do this, but and I just heard this the other day, is that word give means to set the desires in your heart.
That makes sense.
He sets the desires in our heart. So that's how he can, fulfill that.
Right.
Is that he gives us desires.
Right. And that makes a lot more sense because the things we desire are good things. I mean, I wanted more children. There's nothing wrong with that, but it was not part of God's plan. It just wasn't part of his plan for our lives. So if we're really trying to pursue him and the destiny he has for us, the unique destiny that each of us is called to, whatever it is, whether it's being a wife and a mom or not, we have to be, I think that's a wonderful way to think about that he sets the desires in our heart. I wish they would just retranslate that so we would all stop using that verse incorrectly, but that's a great point.
Mm-hmm. And there's another thing that you had written a post about this that I love that you said, and I think it's so important and wise, is that good is the enemy of best. So it was a good thing for you to think about adopting this child, but it was not the best thing
exactly
for your family.
I think good is always the enemy of the best. I mean, it just is, because it's so often the thing that'll stop us. We'll stop at the good and not go for whatever it is that God has as the best. But the best is often going to be hard. It just is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actually had several, when we were pursuing adoption, there was actually several children that we pursued, and it just didn't work out. And one in particular, I actually had a friend who had a dream. I think it was a dream she actually had, and she, it was kind of a new thing for her, and that she had a dream that our child was going to be sandy haired and blue eyes. And so, and kind of one of those things where you just tuck it back into your head. And you're like, well, I'll take that and we'll see.
Yeah.
And there was a child that came to us through a friend. They knew a friend of a friend who was basically fostering a child, and they made the connection with us. And I was talking to the foster dad, and I was asking, I said, what color eyes does he have? And he said blue. And I was like, oh my goodness, this could really be it. And all this conversation, and then we talked to the social worker, and it seemed like we were having problems because we were out of state, and the whole and where he was in his termination rights with his parents and all of this. So there just seemed to be a lot of hurdles. And I was talking to the foster dad again, and he goes, oh, and by the way, I don't know what I was thinking. I looked again, and his eyes aren't blue; his eyes are green. And after all that, I mean, it was kind of like one of those things and, I still wanted to believe, but it was like something in me knew that he wasn't ours. And it was actually and all of that did get, not because of that, but it did get shut down. It just didn't work because of just the situation it was.
Right.
And that was, I think, the third time we had pursued a child, and it just didn't work out. And I was just like, that was one of the times you were kind of like, God, didn't you call us to this?
Right.
This was your idea, and none of this is working. But at the same time, I had open hands. I was like, okay, if he's not ours, then there's another little boy that's out there.
Right.
And it was 1 month later that we got the call that we had been matched. And I'll never forget, they handed us the packet when we went in to talk to them, and I saw his picture, and he had sandy hair and blue eyes. And I didn't even have to hear something. I was like, I know, and I know that's it, So all that to say is, yeah, I get that. And even when we want it to work, it might have been good for us to push forward and get this other child, but the best was our son.
Right, exactly.
And that's the difference between good and best.
Right, but you don't know that during it. You didn't know that when you're going through. You know it now, and it makes total sense. So if people are going through something difficult, a difficult adoption, or anything that has to do with what we're talking about today, or any issue really, just know that with perspective, with time comes perspective.
Mm-hmm.
With putting some years on it, it's going to make sense. It doesn't make sense today, but think about what Job went through. He's the one guy in the Bible we all wish we could just tear that story out. Who wants what he went through? But he could look back at that 20 years later, I imagine, and his life, everything had improved and doubled. Not that he didn't still miss the children that he lost, but he gained back everything times two, and it's not that we do it for that reason, because that's not always going to be how it's going to turn out. But, when he was in the midst of it, it was very difficult. So when you're in it, it's harder to just kind of to take that step back and go, maybe this is going to work out for the best. That's where trusting the Lord really comes in.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So the other thing that you talked about is your feelings in the moment versus what the Holy Spirit is telling you to do, especially as you wanted to adopt that child versus obeying God, saying, no, that's not your child.
Right.
So, we concentrate a lot on this podcast specifically about obedience and remain faithful to, that living by the Spirit. So can you talk a little bit about feelings?
A scripture I did learn early on is the one that says the heart is desperately wicked. Above all things, who can know it? Everybody says, follow your heart. And that's the world's advice. If we follow our heart, we're usually going to make a mistake, because that's just not how God works. I mean, my heart, when they told me that this is your baby if you want, this is your son, because that's what I was really hoping to be able to have for my husband, to pass the name along, pass the family. Although God kind of did that with our daughter. That name is still being passed along, which is kind of cool. But if we trust in our feelings just are going to deceive you. They're going to lie if we make decisions based on that. So that was something the Lord taught me pretty early on. And I think, had it been 4 or 5 years earlier that we'd gotten that call, we would have said, yeah, that's my baby. But we had gone through, we were older in the Lord. I mean, by probably, several years to have really, and we really pressed in. We've never been what I would consider casual Christians. We've always been ones that want to learn, that want to grow, that want the best God has, that want whatever that means. So I was able to sense that, and I asked my husband, because we were on different extensions and we were talking to our friends in Hungary, and as soon as I got off the phone, I said, what do you think? And he said, I don't think that's our baby. And I said, I'm feeling the exact same thing. So we had the confirmation that it was both of us feeling that way, and that we knew that this was going to be the son for our friends that they'd been praying for. So had we followed our feelings, it would have been our child, and not that it wouldn't have been good, but it wouldn't have been God's best. And for what he was wanting to do with our family and with our daughter, I don't know that we would have been able to follow that path the way we were able to follow it for her. So that's where I think you have to be so careful and try to live your life listening to the Holy Spirit. Sometimes the Holy Spirit and your emotions will agree. I mean, that's definitely possible, but oftentimes the Spirit he just transcends that. It's just going to be something bigger and something, it's going to cause you to look a little bit further ahead, look down the road. And it's going to cause you to trust, because what else are we supposed to do? We don't know the future. We don't know what's coming tomorrow. We can only go by today. And if I can't trust the Lord for every single aspect of my life, then I'm really not trusting him at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this just comes with, I'm just thinking about the people who might be struggling with this. And I think a lot of this is maturity and going through some of these things and finding that the Lord is faithful and being able to look back on your life to say, yeah, when I listened to God, it really did work out for the best. But some people don't have that history yet with the Lord. And I know you talked about in your post several different people that have stories in the Bible that we can rely on really for their faith. Because I think sometimes if we don't have faith of our own, we kind of have to borrow from other people's faith. By that I mean all the witnesses that we have, like Noah and his faith, and even Job and his faith, and Abraham, and even the stories that we share on this podcast and your story. And so I would just say to the people listening, if you don't trust God, because I know so many people deal with trust issues with God, and they don't have the history of knowing that it's best. So I would just say that you would just, glean from Kate and her story and the people of the Bible and their story. Don't you think as a young Christian that's what you have to do?
Oh, I think you have to, because on your own, you just don't have it yet. And until you've gone through some things, I think we make a mistake, like you were saying earlier, well, it's the desire of my heart, so God has to do it. We think God is a genie in the bottle. And if I have this idea or I want to do this thing, well, then it's a good thing, and therefore God's going to make it happen. Well, it just does not always work that way. Look at Joseph. Joseph was, what is it, 17 years or 15 years in the pit and in the jail and as a slave. But the cool thing that I love about Joseph is when finally everything turned around and his brothers have come to him. If you don't know the story of Genesis in the Bible, of the story of Joseph, it's at the end of Genesis, a great, great story. I mean, it's just
one of my favorites.
Oh, it's so full of so much. Mm-hmm. But where he says at the end, hey, this wasn't, God sent me ahead of you to save you, to his whole family, to all his brothers and his father and everything, that he realized that this wasn't just about him. And I think, again, we're just so narcissistic. We think the world revolves around us, where oftentimes we're just a cog in the wheel. We're part of something so much bigger. And if we can kind of see ourselves that way, rather than we're the end all and be all of the universe and our happiness is important. I don't think our happiness is particularly important to God. I think our obedience is what's important, I mean, there are a lot of people going through tough times that are not happy. I've had seasons in my life that were not happy. You've had, just with the things you've gone through with failed adoption attempts. That does not make you happy or make you feel good, but you don't stop following the Lord because of that. If anything, if you're really trying to pursue him in your life, it's going to drive you closer because you're going to have to say, what is going on, Lord? You have to help me figure this out. And you can always find a good biblical example if you read your Bible and have a good church where they can help you to understand these things. But I think you're right. It makes a big difference the more mature you are in the Lord rather than being a brand new Christian. But if you're a brand new Christian, find yourself a mentor. If you're a woman, find an older woman that can help you through some of these things, can explain some of these things. That was very helpful for me in the beginning. I've had, all through my Christian walk, I've had women much further ahead in their faith than I am, so I can really pull from them and get advice and get prayer, and those things are important. And I don't know how you feel about this, Amy, but I think it's kind of missing in the church. The whole Titus 2 thing of that we're supposed to be. I talk to so many younger women your age, and they say, I have nobody. There's no women in my church. They either don't want to be bothered or they don't feel like they're equipped to help the younger women. And I think it's a huge missing link. The older women like me, the grandmas, we need to be out there mentoring the younger women as best we can,
Well, I think it's so, and we've had this conversation. I've been helping at our church with women's ministry, just getting started, and we've talked about this, and we see the need. I think what happens is the younger women say, well, I don't want to bother somebody that's older, and I don't really know, but I think, and I'm just guessing, older women say, well, who wants me? Right. Like, what do I have to offer?
Exactly. And we all feel like I'm so technically challenged, as you could tell before we set up this call, but, I don't understand a lot of those things. I don't do all the cool things online. I mean, there's several things that I do and that I understand, but there's a lot I don't, and there's some that come along, I just go, I'm just not jumping on that learning curve. It is tougher when you grew up. I mean, before the years of cell phones, before I was born in the 50s, there were no VCRs. I mean, to have a color TV was a big deal. So you have a 25-year-old who's never known anything different. We're kind of in different worlds, so there's a little bit of that. But once you get to the spiritual things and talk about the Lord, then that is common ground if we can kind of get past all that other stuff. Or the fear of, they're not going to think I'm hip, or whatever goes through our minds, or we think we're bothering you. I mean, and for some that may be true. For there may be some older women that just don't really want to be bothered, but I think there's a lot of us out there that are willing to help and really want to kind of help bring along the next generation of strong Christian women. I mean, we need good role models, good faith, women of faith that are going to really make a difference in the world and change the world, because it is not going anywhere good at this point.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I would just say, I would just challenge everybody to make the ask. Like, if you see an older woman that you, can look to, that you just ask. And if you see a younger woman that you see potential in, then make the ask. People will say no. right? I mean, I hope some people are learning. I know, like with Lisa Turker's book, The Best Yes, she's helping us say yeses and nos to the right things. But I mean, I think we do have to be brave. And really, I think a lot of it too is just, praying to God to ask, to show us who we need to ask.
Exactly.
And bring a person along to help us with that. Another thing that our church, actually a young lady in our church is doing, is that she actually just brought together some, she's in her 30s, just brought some ladies together, and then has invited maybe the next generation up to come in and speak just on Wednesday nights, and just tells people, if you find a connection with this person, then reach out to them.
Yeah.
So creating those spaces to where that connection is there, and then just seeing where it goes from there.
Exactly. And knowing that it may not be a formal, we're going to get together every week kind of thing. Sometimes it's just ask somebody out to lunch, and start talking to them and see if there's a connection. Pretty much anybody will go have lunch or have coffee, so that.
I'm always up for coffee.
Yeah, that's not that difficult. And if they can't do it, or they don't have time, or they don't want to, they'll tell you. But you never know. You might find a second mom out there.
Yes. All right. Well, is there any other, as we think about this being obedient and just walking this faith journey, any other scriptures that you would like to share to encourage somebody?
I mean, the Jeremiah 29:11, the common one that everybody, he knows the plan. He knows the plans he has for me, and he does. And I think it's a matter of trusting those plans. The other one that's always gotten me is Philippians 3:10, the one about the fellowship of his sufferings and the power of his resurrection. We all want the power. We just don't want to deal with the suffering, but they kind of go hand in hand. Jesus, you look at his life, he suffered a lot. And if we're going to follow him, if we're going to walk in his shoes, in his footsteps, we're going to know difficulty and sorrow and those things. But that's what, it's just part of the human condition, the fallen human condition that we live in. Until we get to heaven, those things are going to be part of our lives. So if we go into it kind of knowing that with our eyes open, not thinking, become a Christian and life is wonderful. No, become a Christian and all of a sudden, you may start experiencing some more difficult things, but you have great hope. You have Jesus Christ who, he's the same yesterday and today and forever. And the things that he did in the past, the things that he did in the Bible, he's still doing those things today. Those principles are still true and they're still real. And, I think that's what's going to keep you sane in a really crazy world.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I just so appreciate you sharing your wisdom that you have gained in your story of pain and suffering, but how God has really turned that around and used it for his plans. It's just so beautiful. I personally am a recipient of the gifts of your daughter. I love her song that she has out now, Holy Spirit. I think that's just going to be like her classic worship song that will go on forever. I love that one. So if people want to connect with you and see all your yummy
my recipes,
food and what all your beautiful writing, where can we find you at?
I'm at katebattistelli.com. I'm a kind of a food and faith blogger, which really doesn't make any sense, except I love to write about things of faith and I love to eat and to cook. So
well, we got to eat, right?
That's right. And my food, my recipes tend to be more on the healthy side. My husband and I now are trying to eat gluten free, so I do a lot of that, but still that taste really good. At least he says
I'm gluten free. So
good. Oh yeah,
very appreciative of that.
I got lots on there and more to come, and that's evolving too. Our health journey. But yeah, just katebattistelli.com, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest and Twitter and all the fun things.
Well, thanks again for being here today.
You are so welcome, Amy. Thank you for having me.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kate. There is one particular part of the conversation that's been kind of eating at me since we recorded it, and it's the part that we had a conversation about the verse Psalm 37:4. Trust in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And I brought up a recent talk that I had heard where I heard that word give could also mean set, that he sets the desires of our heart. He's the one that puts the desires of our heart. And I had not had a chance to really look at that, but I did some of that this week. And as I've thought more about it, just wondering which is it. Is it saying that when we delight in him, he puts desires in our hearts? Or is it that when we delight in Him and as we grow in Him, He gives us the desires of our hearts because our character is changing closer to Him? And really, I think it's both. I think as we delight in Him, our character changes, and naturally the desires that are coming out from our heart are really in line with Him and His Word. So He can give us those desires. But I also think there are times that He sets a desire in our heart that we didn't come up with. It wasn't our idea. And He sets it in our hearts and then is pleased to fulfill that in our life. So I'm not being dogmatic here about that. I'd be happy to talk more about it with you, but I wanted to let you know that I had thought a little bit more about that. But I think what we can all agree is that God is not a genie, and just because you love the Lord does not mean that every single desire in your heart is going to be fulfilled. And really, I'm saying this on the heels of getting a really hard no in my own life. So it's so hard sometimes to trust in Him, but He is so trustworthy. And I lean on stories like Kate's and Joseph's from the Bible to remember that He's God and I'm not, and I can trust His plans. I hope you can do the same as well. So I hope you check out the show notes over at featherspodcast.com, and be sure to subscribe with your email, and you'll get an email with the show notes every time an episode is published. So, okay, friends, we will see you next time on Feathers.